control glucose levels of critically ill patients. We know that if you control that better, patient outcomes are better in a variety of ways. And that was something that was all done manually, and so there was a lot of error and imprecision. And so we devised a program that really did it really nicely without hazardous ups and downs of the blood sugars. And now I guess it's sold that once, and then the person, the company that buys it sold it again, is back on board with that. And I think you have a background in mathematics and Shade said chemical engineering, right?
Yeah, chemical engineering.
Yeah.
Control math, actually. Control circuits.
So that's where I thought he might be able to give some guidance to this sort of project as I thought about it a little bit.
And the secret to the project is if you understand the physiology, medicine, the pulmonary medicine in this case, and then you apply basically standard feedback, engineering feedback methods for controlling something, in this case, supply of oxygen, you actually can get the best of both worlds, because, feedback controllers fly airplanes, they park cars, they control your thermostat, they're everywhere, and they're very sophisticated, and they're very precise. They've never, except for this other tool, they've never been applied to medicine. So applying feedback principles to a physiologic or a medicine application is number one, can be unique, and it can lead to very good outcomes that medicine hasn't even thought about. And has historically been very slow to adapt. Because as soon as you're going to do something that was perfect like this, you'd be surprised at how much resistance you'll get from your pulmonary colleagues for the first few years.
Nobody wants to believe new products, right?
They don't want to make any changes, and they want the doctors to be in charge. Even though in what you're describing, it probably would be a lot smarter to have something controlling it minute to minute rather than a physician checking it once a day, which is about the maximum they check. I think that often. Sorry.
Twice a week.
Yeah, you're conscientious. So I think it's a great project. I think it's, I can help guide you, but what you need to do is just kind of understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then get down to engineering math about how to do it, how to interpret engineering math to combine it to physiologic situations. And the physiologic situations is the harder thing for the engineers to understand. But with your dance knowledge, you probably will be able to do that. So what are your thoughts and what are your thinking?
I think we were going to just ask you some questions about your invention first, and then we'll get into some of the specifics that we wanted to know about ours and how you can help us. So first, we just wanted you to tell us a little bit about your invention. We've done some research, but we want to just know some more specifics.
Like, on the Hospira website, I guess that was the former owner.
Yeah, and they took all the good stuff out of it.
So they said on their website there was 30 or so different algorithms you used.
Yeah, there's probably many more than that,
But I guess how'd you come about finding those? Like, what do they all represent in your project?
let me get this way.
You want
I've got Burgess.
You want the chalkboard? I mean,
Not really. The paper they can take with them. Chalkboard will get through. What we did is we set up a set of targets. Comparing to the last glucose. I'm going to just use shorthand, blood glucose. And if that's 45 degrees, so this is 1,000, that's 1,000, okay?
Mhm.
Well, if your last blood sugar was 1,000, and I'm going to start over. Most doctors want to set a target range. So they want the blood sugar to be, let's say, I'm going to be hypothetical because the literature is changing and Dan can tell you about that, but and that's the way things happen. Historically, most people have blood sugars that range between about 70 and maybe 100. That's the way all of you live. In the morning it's a little bit lower, you eat and it goes up and your body releases insulin. So let's say that's an ideal target. And historically, doctors were never able to get there because when you start giving insulin, you often overshoot. And if you get sugars less than 60 or less than 50, then your brain doesn't work right, and you start feeling funny, sweaty, you can't function, and people die. So what doctors would do would set a higher target. So let's say 120 to 90. But if you're 1,000 last hour, you don't want the next sugar to be 120 because that means the osmolality dropped from a sugar of 1,000 to an osmolality of 100. So what they discovered is you want the sugar, if you start off with a patient who has diabetes and has a very high sugar, 1,000, you want it to come down slowly. So what we did is we came up with a range of targets. I didn't draw that very well because this was like that. Anyway, so if the sugar was 1,000, you want it to drop maybe somewhere between 50 and 100 at first hour, but you didn't want it to drop more. So if the blood sugar was here, last hour, and this hour, the blood sugar came back, let's say it came back right there, right in the middle of the range, between 50 down and 100 down, 75 down. Well, that's perfect. That means that the dose of medicine I gave here was right. So, and then the other thing you need to understand is that we dose insulin is normally dosed as some constant times the blood sugar minus some 65, let's say, times another constant. But most people think it's really, it has another constant and a squared term. In other words, you make a certain amount of insulin for a certain sugar, but if your sugar is real high, you make a whole lot more. It's not a linear response. You know the difference between a linear response and a nonlinear response. This is a when you put this part into the equation, it's a nonlinear response, meaning it takes a whole lot more insulin at high sugars than it does at low sugars. So I decided to dose this way instead of that way. And then, so the sugar is 1,000, it comes back here. The next hour, it's supposed to be here because that comes over to 45 degrees. So the next sugar should drop another 75. If that, I didn't draw it straight, but let's just say that. That would be a perfect response. In other words, I very accurately predicted that constant, and that constant, and the patient fell back and stayed right in the middle of the range every time they came down. In other words, I brought them down at the targeted range each hour.
Mhm.
If they fell to here, above the range, I didn't give enough insulin because it didn't drop enough. So if the distance between, well, you have to have some idea, you have to, in medicine, you can't do the same thing you could with cars or some other mechanical thing. You can't go whole hog. So this distance compared to this distance is how far proportionally you are away from your target. So this number divided by this number is the proportion away from your target. So if you were at this point, you'd have 0.